All right, so like I said, today we're basically recapping the last 10 years so far. But real quick, moving forward, it's the viewers' engagement that really helps creators like myself grow on these platforms. So it's not only just for the numbers game and the technobabble of like YouTube itself, but the likes and comments really help inform me that there's interest in what I do, so I can actually make improvements involving my work. So if you like what you see and you wish to see, more artwork and works in progress, please leave likes and actually subscribe and, maybe even a comment if you have time. Be sure to check out the links in the description. And without further ado, let's kind of crack on here. So just as a quick reference point for all of this, I was fortunate enough to be able to graduate and receive a good degree back in 2013, but even then it was just barely. So coming into adulthood and progressing through my college career, I was extremely unprepared in many areas of my life. Despite that, I was able to scrape by. Partially out of necessity, in the second semester of my final year, I dropped a double major and pieced together a senior exhibit and graduated with a fine arts degree. By spring of 2013, I would say that my life reached a bit of a melting point, but, by this time things began to look up. In a year's time, I was still very much ill prepared and strapped with college debt in spring of 2014. And around this time, little art was being made. There were doodles and sketchbooks, some that are now lost to me, but there were also a few scraps left over that I was able to make into prints that I still have around today. I had previously pursued a career in art education, and I still had the naive and limiting belief around this time that success as a studio artist was like a very limited prospect reserved for the few. So the idea of being a working artist was far too fetched for me at this time. In 2014, when having access to the internet and a little bit more free time on my hands, I was able to discover that there are people out there actually building platforms and developing communities. Basically just people achieving their own forms of success as it applies to them. And so it was here that essentially this whole venture kind of began for me. And it's here where I would love to say that everything worked out and, the common advice you hear was applicable and it was so easy. Dreams really do come true with little effort. And as you can tell by my flat tone, I'm verging on the hyperbolic here, but you can see what I'm getting at. And I really have to interject and say, always take outside advice and someone else's experience with a grain of salt when starting out. Ask just about any artist out there on how they achieve their success, and they'll most likely tell you in most cases that they've either felt lucky that they've gotten where they have, or they just worked really hard at it, or somewhere along those lines. But if you ask enough people, you begin to realize that there's no real one path. It all essentially comes from within and without, and it's different for every person. So it's essentially kind of up to you to figure out your own way that applies to you. While I'm still very much an optimistic believer, my experience in this endeavor hasn't been the most easygoing so far for several reasons. But simply put, it's just that life just keeps getting in the way. The bitter truth is that I've been at this on and off for about 10 years, and my ability as an artist is arguably still the same as it's been since then. There's been little improvement on my craft overall. I posted my first YouTube video in 2018 and only have made a handful since. And I started my business in 2021 and have yet to make a sale. And don't get me wrong, these aren't complaints, they're just simply facts. I have yet to put in the work that warrants any form of progression or success. As with anything, there's a lot of ups and downs, and I've had a lot of fun over the years being able to experiment with new materials and mediums and do things that I haven't really ever been able to do before. And I can honestly say that photography and film have been something that I have found that I would really love to learn a little bit more in the future. And however hokey it sounds, like there's a sense of peace that I've been able to reach in this time that through the slow nature of the past 10 years, that's kind of made all the difference for me in the end. It's finally here where I want to get to the crux of the video. If anyone watching has any hopes of starting an art business or any business in general, there's a few takeaways, from a beginner's 10-year experience here, if anything. And I want to emphasize, as far as business goes, I'm very much a beginner. I'm not trying to sound preachy or say that I have any great insight on this, but these are just kind of like little simple truths that I've come to glean from these past 10 years here. Number one is a bit of an obvious one, but in order to be successful, I would imagine, you need to be skillful or knowledgeable in a field in order to maintain a practice. And I'm not trying to sound conceited, but it wasn't a lack of skill that I've felt like I've struggled with, but I quickly found out that being really good at something doesn't necessarily carry you all too far. It was a quick lesson to find that, it's a lot more involved. Number two, a big factor for me was health, both physical and mental. It seems that my physical and mental health have traded place over the 10 years progression, but I'm only just now getting back into a solid routine, whereas I was an extremely fit person before 10 years ago. Not so much now. I have a long way to go again in that regard. But in regards to mental health, like the warning signs must have been all around for anybody who knew me 10 years ago. But during this time, I was completely blinding myself to just how much work I had to do internally in order to get anywhere. And I still feel like I really need to focus in this area, but I would say that this has been my greatest hurdle and main reason for the lack of my success in my career so far, is just this overall huge mental barrier that I've had to overcome. Also with this, I'll say that you really have to think about this in the long term. You're not going to really be this young go-getter forever if you're starting this out early in life. And it's not sustainable if you can't maintain both healthy mind and body. Again, these are pretty self-explanatory, but it's literally like a simple truth. Like, you don't realize these things, and you might not even be aware of these issues until you're confronted with them, and then it's like, okay, how did I not know this sooner? But take what you will. And number three, finances. So for whatever reason, talking about money in capitalist America is taboo in certain circles. But as I've said, I've yet to make a consistent income. I'm not a financial professional, and I'm making it sound like I'm about to give you some financial advice. I'm not. But I will say that when I hear advice about people starting out and starting a business, like, make your prospective business like a side hustle first, and then work towards an organic growth before you make it your full-time thing. I would definitely say that I can now understand that, and I totally agree with what they're saying here. Like, if you're not afraid to make changes that affect your finances or your financial outcomes in today's economy, I just have one question. Are you okay? Jokes aside, I've been at this on and off. I would leave at times just to try to make ends meet, and returning to it probably wouldn't even have happened, or even I probably wouldn't even consider doing it to begin with, without my husband in the end kind of pushing me to return to it. Which kind of brings me to my next point here. For the sake of time, I omitted a lot of this, and I kind of mashed these two together, even though they don't necessarily make too much sense together. But number 4 is support system and insecurities. So when starting out in a business, especially if it's a solo venture, you're gonna eventually need someone who you can talk to. Whether it's something more like a consultant or something more informal, someone that you can talk to help you along a little bit. someone to either critique your work or even just a friend to vent to when things get a little frustrating. Keeping on this path really, like I said before, would not be possible without my husband for me. He's been like the biggest support system I've had so far. And it's now when I'm finally at the starting line, kind of taking this seriously, I'm seeing that like starting this business or starting a business isn't really for the faint of heart. And as in most things, it really can't really be done alone a lot of the time. It's here on a more personal level where I'll say it's been my husband that's basically helped me overcome a lot of insecurities that have surfaced over the time that I wouldn't have expected. I've always been really critical of myself in order to maintain like a positive construction, or to kind of, make sure that my ideas aligned with some form of truth, I guess. But over time, I've noticed that kind of, I would be overcritical, and it was like I would second guess everything. But with time here, it's like I've learned to be a little kinder with myself with a little bit of guidance. Truth be told, something you have to keep in mind here, it's easy to get lost in the venture of having fun like I did myself. But you have to take starting business a little bit more seriously than you think. You really have to want this thing to work. So working for yourself over another business means you're dealing with your own insurances, your benefits, and you're also working towards a retirement. Any deviation is going to hinder any one of these things. So it's a life-changing decision, which is pretty significant if you want to stay attached to the modern world. So it takes a while for you to figure out what works for you, and then in upwards of 3 years of consistent work on average to begin building a steady income through an online business. I would say the magic word here is consistent, which is something that hasn't applied to me yet regarding my business. For years, I've been plagued with that sense of doubt and insecurity. And it's something that I come face to face often with. I often struggle making cohesive narratives when creating videos, like including this one as I'm speaking. Because usually, well, in tandem, my internal monologue bubbles to the surface and asks basically the questions that like negative self-talk of, who cares? You have nothing worth offering. Why bother? Like basically that sense of like what somebody will think when seeing this, like, oh great, another privileged white guy on the internet trying to bestow quote unquote wisdom. Great. So in the end, with this train of thought, in the past, I've opted to basically scrap any efforts towards progression. So I would start videos several times throughout the years and basically just never continue with them. Often this kind of came out as, it would start out with excitement, getting back into the flow of things. And then that negative self-talk would take effect. And it was almost as if every time I came back, I had to make false promises or, kind of start from scratch again. So however vulnerable all of this was to admit, it basically sums up the last 10 years for me. The highs and lows. As I've said, I've learned to be kinder here. But there are basically 3 things that I wanted to work on to achieve some semblance of consistency. So there's basically discipline, resilience, and persistence here. Discipline is like I've lacked it at my business, but it's not foreign to me. Being an active member of a cross-country team at one time required a lot of it to function. That positive self-talk is basically saying, like, if you can train to run a race long distance and tackle any physical or mental barriers in the field, you can study to learn business practice and show up every day just the same. So however that applies to yourself too, you could basically say, if I've been able to achieve certain things in the past, there's no reason why I can't do it here too. So it's just basically being kind to yourself, but also having tough love to develop the discipline to keep yourself going. Resilience. So the internet is just as capable, if not a better vehicle for toxic thought. But we need to remember that we're all a little bit more capable than we realize, so you got to don that thick weathered skin and show off the calluses like a badge of honor, because it means you're just putting in the time and effort in the end. Persistence, I would say I'm pretty good at this. I've done what I had to get by. Throughout these 10 years, I've considered other career paths, even up until recently. But working as an artist is something that I keep returning to. So if it's something you really want, it's most likely not going to work out right away. You're just gonna have to keep trying. You're just gonna have to try. And so here we are, basically a decade later. When I ask myself why I still do this, the answer is usually simply, creating just brings me joy. Being an artist is still a versatile occupation, and it's still one tailored to my skill set here. I may not have the illustrious career that I thought I would have 10 years ago, but, all things in time. To kind of conclude everything, the projects that I'll be working on here in the near future are basically going to be one last look back before moving on. So it's kind of like the greatest hits, but the only hits, if you will. As I said, I'm ready to start closing some chapters. I'm ready to, move on with my life here, both personally and professionally. So I hope that I'm gonna, start growing as an artist and start sharpening my skills here. And hopefully you can kind of learn this yourself, but I'm only just now, learning not to take myself so seriously, when at the end of the day, I'm basically just a guy trying to paint pretty pictures and enjoy the remainder of his passage through this plane of existence. But yeah, that's basically everything. The footage here has just been just some of the pieced together portions of old videos, or even just projects that I've done over the years. But hopefully you were able to eye something that you might have liked. But if you watched this far and you've heard me speak all this time and you've actually listened, I thank you so much. I look forward to being back soon here for another one. Take care, and thanks again.